Good morning and welcome to our latest current briefing, Getting to Grips with Smart EV Charging. I'm joined today by Ewan Moyer from Shell Recharge Solutions. Good morning, Ewan. Who is going to start us off today with a presentation on smart charging regulations and specifically looking at the ones that are going to come into force on the 30th of June. If at any point you think of a question and you'd like to ask Ewan, just stick it in the questions box in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and following the presentation, we'll dive into the Q&A and try and get to as many as we possibly can. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ewan for his presentation. Take it away, Ewan.
Thanks, Molly. Welcome all. Good morning. So yes, my name is Ewan Moyer. I'm the Regional Manager for the UK and Nordics at Shell Recharge Solutions Europe. For those who don't know who Shell Recharge Solutions Europe are, so our sort of mission is to enable kind of clean transportation for everyone. And we achieve this through smart charging solutions at home, workplace, and on the go. We currently have around 275,000 charge points over 33 countries, 10,000 of which in our roaming network in the UK. We're really excited to sort of take you through the upcoming kind of smart charging regulations, which I'm sure you're all very interested to hear about. I'll be sort of taking you through kind of what they mean at a very sort of basic level, and also kind of what's next on the horizon, and how these are just really the start of a chain of regulations that we're seeing in the next sort of 6 to 18 months. So if you'd like to go to the next slide for me, please, Molly. So just a little bit of a sort of recap and I guess summary of what these regulations are. So they're kind of split down into 3 requirements, as you can kind of see there on the screen. 2 are relatively straightforward, so I'll take you through those to start with, and then 1 maybe a little bit more complex, particularly if you're sort of new to the EV industry as a consumer. So off-peak charging, what this basically means is all sort of chargers that both home and workplace will be sort of default set to charge the vehicles either during the day or overnight. So basically at sort of non or off-peak periods. And I guess the goal here from a kind of grid perspective is to help kind of flatten that demand both during the day, but obviously overnight from a consumer perspective, to ideally give them more access to cheaper tariffs, ideally renewable, as we would like to sort of see. And we obviously see that more and more with renewable energy sources coming online. The kind of second one there is the random charging delay. Now this one will take a little bit more kind of education from both ourselves and those obviously operating in the industry to consumers. So basically what this means is that any charger beyond the kind of 30th of June, we will see a delay before it actually starts charging. That can be up to around 10 minutes. So we're already sort of preparing internally for questions from customers as to why isn't my charger starting straight away. So like I said at the start there, that kind of education piece and why that's important to have this happening from the 1st of July. Again, the sort of goal here for the grid is to try and soften that impact in terms of those shorter term spikes. So obviously, as we know, in here and now, we've seen tremendous sort of growth in the last kind of 12 months in terms of EV sales and uptake in the UK. That is obviously only going to continue to grow. So sort of 3, 4, 5 years from now, it's about trying to sort of get ahead of the game a little bit and be prepared. And by having sort of a delay there to before the charging session starts, it's reducing that kind of impact in terms of everyone all connecting at the same time and giving the grid operators the opportunity to sort of balance that demand. And that comes nicely onto the last one. So demand side response services. So basically, in short, as demand goes up, the grid is going to be asking customers to reduce their load. And there's a number of different services, both before, so obviously, and after the meter, that we're sort of looking at internally within our energy services team to be ready to support customers as they go on this journey to look at sort of accepting more demand side responses. Now, beyond the 1st of July, there's a requirement it's have the ability basically for charge points to offer this, but it's not a mandatory requirement, whereas the first 2 are. Next slide for me, please, Molly. So obviously I've talked about it a little bit, but kind of why are we seeing these come into effect? So as I said, from here and now, we are obviously seeing that uptake in EVs each month. Obviously the data we see from the SMMT coming out in terms of sales, with BEVs only increasing month on month, that obviously if everyone's going to be starting to charge at the same time, there will be challenges for the grid to be able to respond with that demand. And obviously you can see some stats on there in terms of the volume that power volume that EVs are going to require by 2050. I think it's important to stress that both the government and the national grid are confident that there is going to be enough supply to be able to meet the demand that we're going to expect. There's a recent report that the national grid have released sort of saying that obviously that total you can see on the screen now will equate to about 50% of the UK's electricity usage. So it's going to become even more important, obviously, as I've already alluded to, that as the grid moves to more renewable sources, we're not going to have that ability to use maybe natural gas to just fire things up as quickly as we need to react to that, which is why we're seeing obviously the delay and then obviously the movement to off-peak charging sessions. The other key bit to sort of stress here is it's about obviously the overall peak demand, not just overall demand over the course of the year. And again, that comes back to by having the sort of delay and also off-peak charging, the grid operators working with CPOs, ourselves, charge point operators, can balance that through demand response services. Yeah, and then in terms of the last piece there, I guess the bonus really with the off-peak power and moving that as a default setting when customers are going to use that charging session, it's typically lower carbon energy sources. So as I sort of said, if we didn't sort of implement some of these changes now, ahead of seeing that huge growth, then we could be in a situation where we're still going to need that requirement to react very quickly, which may not always be possible, which you could have a risk there of a blackout in the absolute worst case scenario. Then obviously the natural gas plants would still need to be fired up to support that. So there's still going to be a balance, but this is again sort of moving to the demand response services, some of which we'll come on to there. We'll sort of touch on the next slide, some of the consumer concerns, if you like. So these have really been taken from our recent EV drivers survey that we do every year. We had about 15,000 respondents across Europe, and about 5,500 of those were based in the UK. So I'll link some of those stats on the next slide. If you could go to that for me, please, Molly. So in terms of what does that mean then? So I guess from a consumer perspective, you can clearly see some of the benefits there on the screen. I think one of the things I wanted to talk about just with the off-peak charging and what's important is that they'll be working in tandem both with the delayed charging. So if a customer then sets their car to say, right, I want it to be fully charged at 6 o'clock in the morning, and they want to get access from that cheap tariff, let's say from 1 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the morning, there could be a chance that actually that 10-minute delay will take them through to 10 past 6 in the morning, meaning that actually the tariff that they were hoping to get access to will sort of go into a slightly more expensive tariff. It's not I guess, an issue as such, but it's important that, again, from that education piece, and that's, I guess, one of the key challenges that we all are going to play our part in sharing with customers, is to educate that obviously the overall benefit of having this is to help that the wider grid balancing, as we see that demand on the grid clearly increase with the volume of vehicles that are expected to arrive. I guess just to really validate that though, and coming back to the previous slide that I sort of spoke about, in our recent kind of EV driver survey, 79% of drivers said they would actually be prepared to do this. So there is a real kind of ambition from customers to actually want to help the grid, to actually be part of this transition and play their part in that. And then coming on to the sort of right-hand side of the slide in terms of demand response. So whilst we've got this element here of this is about consumers playing their part basically in allowing, in effect, charge point operators and grid operators to manage their demand on the network, which will take some education from us and others to ensure customers are both aware of that, but also comfortable with that happening. That this is also a sort of first step, and we'll come onto it shortly, around the security regulations that we'll be seeing later on this year. It has been said by 2025, with the volume of charge points that we're expected to see at homes and workplaces, that there is a risk that it could be a large-scale cyber attack. So having sort of a centralized management, as you can see on the slide there, both helps us mitigate that risk, but also equally important, as we've already been discussing, the ability to balance the grid accordingly. I guess the benefit to the end customer here is both obviously the safety aspect, as we just said, but also we're already starting to see some sort of businesses in the market offer sort of incentives to customers. And again, we're seeing that validation through our recent EV driver survey reports. 66% of customers actually stressed that they would be interested in that. So again, customers are open to allowing, I guess, ourselves, our competitors, and also the grid to, in effect, manage their energy supply in exchange for incentives, which is really positive, I guess. It's, again, another way of bringing customers on that journey as we go through the EV transition. Next slide for me, please, Molly. So the future, I guess, where to sort of finish up on for today, before we go into some questions, is these regulations are just a fantastic start to what is effect in the pipeline. So educating the customers is going to be one of our key priorities, sort of going forward, specifically around these upcoming changes. So sort of watch this space. I think it's the big thing from our side that we're seeing, as I said, is customers sort of feeling confident and seeing that change in allowing others to decide when they can charge. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of a transition there from just plugging it in now to having a slight delay to then maybe delay even further. But as long as they've got their vehicle fully charged in the morning when they wake up, what goes on behind the scenes to help support the grid it's just a little bit of a transition. And obviously, we talked about those incentives that can come as part of that. So what's next on the horizon? So as I said, we've got the cybersecurity, which is also part of this, but it will be coming into effect later this year, and we're all well underway already to meet those regulations. Sort of slightly beyond that is kind of the public charging. So we're seeing regulations around ease of use in terms of payment for customers, as well as 99.9% reliability targets for charge point operators to adhere to. And then sort of beyond that, maybe looking 1, 2, 3 years ahead, is the energy services that sort of fit into the demand response services that we've touched upon. So you've got the kind of before and after the meter, and there's sort of different activities and services that our energy services team are already well underway. We've been doing quite a lot of work already in the Netherlands. We participated in a grid balancing exercise there, and also we did some V2X. So for those that don't know, that's vehicle to grid trials a couple of years ago. And whilst we haven't sort of moved forwards, the main reason for that being was that the market just wasn't ready for it at the time. But again, it was just to take some learnings from that what are the challenges with that, and again, being ready for when we start to see these sort of countrywide regulations come into effect, that we have a good understanding as a business, and sort of sharing that with the grid operators and obviously partners and competitors, to make sure that when customers are ready to make that change, that we're making it as easy as possible for them, but also giving them the right decision points to make that choice themselves. In terms of the Shell Recharge solutions, so as I said, we've got a dedicated energy services team ourselves. There's a lot of development going on behind the scenes, as I've said, in terms of looking at that before and after the meter. Things like, for example, we're already looking into a dedicated kind of EV tariff, which I know there's already some out there in the market, for example, Octopus. And it's great to sort of see that already being taken up. Again, we saw quite a lot of feedback in our recent EV driver survey reports that customers would be open to looking into that, particularly if it's sort of from renewable sources. And I guess lastly, just to finish on, for us at Shell Recharge Solutions and where we sit within the kind of broader Shell energy transition strategy, EV plays a key part in that. And I think it's excellent to see these regulations coming into effect. We really welcome them. Believe really that they're sort of fundamental as part of the kind of next step in customers taking that EV transition. So that's it from me today. I appreciate I've gone through quite a lot of detail in 4 slides, so tried to condense that as much as possible. Thanks for your time. Welcome any questions. I see there's probably been a couple come through, Molly. So do you want to pop those through and then we can see how I can answer those?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ewan. So one question in from Matthew Morgan is, do the regulations apply to both residential and commercial EVS?
Yes, they do. Yes, so it's both on home and workplace, yes.
It's a nice quick answer. One from Maria Martin. When you talk about cybersecurity that is coming in, is this something separate to DCC?
Good question. The cybersecurity is part of this. To give you a little bit more detail, I would need to come back to you on that. So if we can take that one down, Molly, I'm happy to pick that up separately, but I don't know off the top of my head to give a sort of specific enough answer on that.
Yep, no problem at all. Maria, if you were keen, if you drop us a question after the session, drop me an email after the session, I'll be able to give you some more information on that. One in from Ruben Parry. Do the new regulations apply to roadside charge points as well as domestic and commercial? I think I've kind of touched on that.
That's a good question. I don't actually know off the top of my head. I believe it's just home and workplace. Again, more than happy to get some steer and clarity on that for you, Ruben. So no, I don't know off the top of my head on that one.
No problem. David Ravitch said, how ready do you think the industry is for the new regulations as a whole, from charge point manufacturers to CPMS systems?
Yeah, great question. I mean, these have been around and known for some time. So to give you some context, we've been working on these sort of at least last 6 months to really be sort of ready for when they land. I think more maybe not just us as those that sort of operate in the industry. I think the bigger challenge and where we probably need to put more focus on is actually the end customer itself. Being sort of in the industry for the last year, I've really got a really good understanding in terms of all the changes that seem to come into effect. It happens all the time, so fast paced that it's such a big change for customers. And if I went up to someone on the street and sort of tried to explain this, I think they would be a little bit perplexed as to just rocking up and filling my car at a petrol station. So I think the industry has been probably ready for this in some respects, and the changes needed to happen will happen. I think it's more about bringing those customers that maybe are already in the market or aren't in the market yet. That's where we really need to place our focus, so they really understand how they can play their part in that broader grid balancing that is going to need to come, as we see already, in terms of that growth within the EV space.
And with the consumer point and the customer point, Ben Garvey Cubban has asked, what barriers are there for EV drivers entering into smart charging and in the future V2G? Do you have a view from this given your EV driver survey?
Yeah, I mean, barriers, also, I'm thinking about some feedback, obviously, we've had from the EV driver survey report. So maybe just give you some context here. So the battery range, better charge point availability. So fairly obvious ones there, but also the initial purchase cost of an electric vehicle. Unfortunate timing, clearly, with the announcement yesterday around the grants, but I think more specifically just for this, obviously in terms of charge point availability. So we obviously have very high ambitions to and sort of goals to get as many charge points both into homes, at workplace, and also from a destination point of view within Shell Recharge. So I think it's 50,000 sort of roadside public charging points by 2025. So we're really trying to sort of support that, I guess, fear, sort of charge point availability anxiety within customers. The sort of battery range for me is, yeah, I think if we look at maybe even just the last year and what we're sort of seeing from an OEM development perspective, we're really seeing that, 350, 400 miles now sort of range becoming a little bit more common. But granted, obviously the price point, whilst there has been considerable improvement, it's still a challenge, I think, when you compare it to your normal ICE vehicles from that perspective.
And one in from Steve Broderick. Several studies show great majority of UK 230 volt networks to houses cannot support EV charging even when spread out time-wise, as these houses are built for circa 1.5 kilowatts per home. How can Shell help this, given from around 20 to 30% car replacement by EVs will overload LV networks even with smart?
Again, great question. I think if I just I'll maybe split that down into two areas. So one is just, I'm happy to share this after the call, is the sort of report that the National Grid did. So in one of the slides, obviously, we talked about the expected, use from the grid that EVs will take, which will, be around 50% of all supply. They themselves and the government feel very confident that through starting with some of these measures initially, that there will be the ability to support that. Now, in terms of the home themselves, I agree, there's some challenges that we see on a day-to-day basis, obviously trying to work with local DNOs, etc., to cater to that. How we can try and support that, so that's what I talked about, the energy services is one element. Where kind of Shell Recharge Solution sits, as I said, in the broader kind of Shell network, we have Sonnen, for example, so that's your home battery storage, but also then working with Shell Energy from an EV tariff perspective. So we're sort of really looking at that whole integrated offer piece as to how we can support that customer with obviously the infrastructure they have at their homes. Now, granted, that's a whole nother sort of discussion and education piece here to bring customers on that journey. And I think we see that maybe with some early adopters, that have taken EVs for some time, that are already on that journey. So having the solar integration, for example, having a battery storage facility on site on their home, and then having a dedicated EV tariff. That is the holy grail where we want to get everyone to as part of that integration to play their part in ultimately what you're talking about here, which is being able to actually meet that demand on the grid. If I come back to obviously the National Grid, they've sort of stressed that they're confident in that, but granted, I'm sure there's always different viewpoints on
that. The next question in from Severine Tergis. When talking about DSLR, do you mean V2G? When can we expect this to happen for both domestic and non-domestic customers?
Yeah, that's what I mean. So demand side services, exactly that. So within that, as I said, it's a kind of before and after meter, and there's different kind of activities that our energy services team are looking at. Not that would always be visible, I think, to the end customer. It can be, but at this stage, it would be more about, as I said, making it easy for someone to move into an EV and then making that as easy to understand as to what the benefit they're bringing. And then we talked about some of the incentives, for example, that we would expect customers to see. And obviously, we saw that validation in our recent EV Driving Survey report. In terms of V2G, as I said, we've done that trial, not specifically in the UK, but obviously in the Netherlands. a couple of years ago, and it was a successful trial. It achieved what it wanted, but at this moment in time, there just wasn't, or that moment in time, I should say, I guess the awareness is probably one, but also the appetite for consumers en masse to take that forward. So I would very much expect to see that probably in the next 3 to 5 years would be when I would see that. I think if we think about some of the more basics we've already talked about, so charge point availability, these sort of regulations coming into effect, the education of that is going to be key as part of that then transition for customers to feel comfortable in really accepting that. Because I think, if I think about myself, as I said, being in the industry for only sort of the last 12 months, it's very different to, as I said, just filling up your car in a petrol station to almost just like charging your car at home, like you would do with your phone, and allowing, energy suppliers, ourselves, the grid operator, to in effect manage your charging session. So I think it's just a little bit more time before we're really at that point where that will become mainstream.
A question from Alex Tucker. There is not much information on the actual DSLR requirements and how it works. Do you have more information? Although a requirement on a charging point information is very vague.
Yes, so I can happily share more information on that. As I said, we do have obviously a lot of detail on that. So what I would say there, Molly, is if we can get the details there, more than happy to give a bit more insight on the demand response services element. It would be something separate, but more than happy to share that.
Absolutely. Just to reiterate, after this session, the slides will be emailed around to everyone who is registered, and as part of that, there'll be an email address on there where you can contact me. So if there is anything that you want to ask Ewan that we haven't managed to cover, just reach out and we're more than happy to answer if we possibly can. Next question from Neil Gething. Will the regulations apply uniformly across all types of charging stations, home, destination, fast charging, or do you anticipate variations?
Yeah, so I think someone asked this already. So definitely for home and sort of workplace business setting, from a sort of destination point of view, I would need to check on that. So we'll happily come back. Obviously, that's 2 people that asked. So we'll maybe even add that into the slides, just as some questions there that we can give responses to. So I need to come back to you on that one.
Question from Madeleine Brooks. Is implementing a randomized delay function really smart? Should we not instead be aiming to optimize charging based on real-time prices?
Yeah, and I think it's a fair challenge. I think, will we see maybe iterations to these perhaps in the future? For sure. And I think what's key here is how I'm viewing this, and how we're sort of viewing it is, this is just another step, right, as part of this kind of EV transition from a traditional ICE vehicle, as we've already sort of spoken about, to something that is going to feel very new to customers. So in terms of those demand response services, how those sort of work, sort of what you're talking about there, absolutely. And that will need to be more available, and something that obviously we're looking to work on and provide to our customers ourselves, once we've obviously given that education. But do I think that this is just a great first start? Absolutely. Do I expect them to maybe amend in the future? For sure, as we get more understanding of what's going to work better than what's maybe been previously said before.
Fantastic. The next question. It's great, we've got tons of them. Another one from Ben Garvey-Coven. What incentives do you believe the industry need to put in place to drive, pun intended, the required driver behaviours to realise the benefits of smart charging and V2G?
Yeah, a great question. I mean, I know obviously there's some sort of competitors out there that are already sort of looking into this. So I think it really depends on the end consumer itself. So, for example, if you look specifically for us, it could be things like, okay, if you're willing to charge at this certain time, it could be a reduced rate on the on-the-go network. It could be, loyalty points they could build up over time. And I think it's just about understanding what is going to suit the needs of that specific customer to make that transition more attractive and incentivize them to keep allowing both us as a sort of charge point operator, but also the grid network to do that load balancing in the background. So no specific, I guess, answer to that, but I guess it's about just us understanding the sort of trends and behaviors that we're seeing within that specific customer and what works and what doesn't work, to then roll that out once we have some good understanding and profiles of different customer segments as to what works best to ultimately get that buy-in to allow that grid balancing to happen, because it needs to happen, as you've seen with that volume that we're expecting in EVs. This needs to happen, and it's, yeah, as I keep stressing, it's great to see this both now, because you can imagine in the future people saying, if we hadn't done it, well, why aren't we seeing that when we have that sort of mass adoption, if you like.
And I have another question in from Steve Broderick asking what whole systems thinking is being done, e.g. the effect of millions of smart chargers switching via IoT/cloud apps to car, no random delay.
Sorry, could you just repeat that question?
No problem. What whole systems thinking is being done, e.g. the effect of millions of smart chargers switching via IoT or cloud apps to car?
Okay. Again, I'll probably need to get some more steer, I think, from just our energy services team. But what I would say is, if I just take the example of the work that was done in the Netherlands in terms of that grid balancing exercise, and obviously V2X in the past, that and we're already seeing that in the UK with some participants in the Fred trial, which was a similar sort of exercise. That kind of interaction, the likes of ourselves, other players in the market, the regulators, having these kind of interactions is key, I guess, to ensuring that we are joined up and sharing that best practice. But in terms of more specifics, I would need to come back to you on that, and I'm more than happy to do that once I've had a conversation with our energy services team.
And a question in from Alex Tucker. OCPP is now a requirement on all chargers moving forwards from the 30th of June. Is that correct? This will make the cost of all chargers a lot higher, with little incentive, as the grant has now gone for domestic installations. Do you think the government need to do more?
Yes, the first question. And to your second question, yes, obviously it was disappointing to see the announcement yesterday, but I also probably see that as quite a natural stepping point into, obviously we've seen it month on month, the growth that we're seeing, and we would see it faster, obviously, if there weren't for the chip shortages, and obviously COVID still having its effect on certain parts of the world. There's always more that could be done, but I think naturally, if I look at ourselves, I think there's more that we can also do to support that. So, and that goes for the industry. I think it's just still a great time to be part of this, growth that we're seeing. Like the OZEV grant ending, for example, there's still that cost barrier. And if I come back to the recent EV drivers survey report that obviously we did this year, 47% would want a lower initial purchase. So I know we're sort of seeing more of those kind of leasing models potentially to try and give more access to it, but it's still relatively expensive. But that will only continue to come down as more and more people take an EV or full BEV. So in terms of the government specifically, though, of course there's always more they could do. But again, these kind of regulations, it's a great sort of stepping stone into, as we've already talked about, the kind of demand response services that are going to be very much needed to help balance the grid in the future.
And then I know you touched on sort of what you can do, and that leads me nicely into a question I was hoping to ask you, which is what elements have you been working through with the regulator ahead of the 30th of June at Shell Recharge?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, again, I've sort of said this a couple of times, and we really welcome these changes and obviously believe they're kind of fundamental into that next step in the EV transition. We've been working very closely with the regulator, sort of our customers and partners, to try and keep them as informed and confident about these regulations coming into effect, and obviously how that's going to kind of impact our sort of products and services that we're going to be offering. ultimately then leading to that charging experience that we're seeing customers will be going through. In terms of that sort of process, that's sort of been going on now, as I said, sort of the last 6 to 9 months. And yeah, we'll be obviously working towards the 30th of June with the regulator and be in a position to continue selling beyond that date.
And another one that we've had in the questions box: if turning one more EV will overload the local network, how will Shell Smart Solutions detect this and make sure it will not happen?
Yeah, good question. Again, when we look at some of the sort of services that the energy services team are working on that kind of trial perspective that I spoke about in the Netherlands, those kind of services, if you like, are still in development. So in terms of the specifics of how that actually will work, we need to come back and give you some clarity on that. But all I can stress is that it's those types of examples that we're diving into at this moment in time to really understand how we can do that both sort of on a local level, but obviously as we're seeing that transition on a mass scale. So in terms of the specifics as to how that works, I would need to come back to you on that.
No problem. And next question: have high power prices changed the interest or engagement with smart EV charging?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And again, we sort of see that feedback from consumers. I'm just seeing, I've got the stats in front of me here that we've recently seen that from our EV driver survey report. I mean, I guess firstly, these kind of regulations have been in the pipeline for some time. Customers are sort of saying, you know, they would choose a BEV because of the environmental benefits, and maybe not specifically linked to your pricing question. But I guess the second part to that is, yes, I'm just seeing here that I think it was 68% of drivers are worried about the cost of living rising, and obviously you can tie the two together. So it definitely has played its part. Obviously, it's very unfortunate about some of the events that are going on around the world and that impact that that's having, and obviously then inflation that we're seeing. So it's great that we've got that price point as it is, from obviously comparing that to an ICE vehicle and the costs that we're seeing there from a petrol perspective. But no doubt that is accelerating that transition, and we hear that feedback a lot, both through our sort of leasing partners, but also through our end customers, that's one of the main reasons they've sort of made that decision. Primarily, obviously, if you see in the UK, as you probably all are aware, in terms of the benefit in kind incentives for company car drivers to really make that shift over. So absolutely, it's playing its part, and we want to sort of educate customers around, again, that sort of total cost of ownership. So whilst it might be high to buy the EV initially, obviously comparing that to an all ICE vehicle, both petrol and diesel, as they continue to rise, yeah, absolutely, it's a key sort of selling point to make, you know, a customer switch to a BEV.
And next question: can you see the default off-peak working in a workplace? Only if the business is open 9 to 5, everyone will override.
It's a good point. Yeah, I mean, there's other things obviously that are already out there that can support customers in that scenario. So we would call it dynamic power management, but in effect, it's sort of a software that in effect manages that incoming supply, both, you know, energy being used elsewhere in the building, but then also what's coming in from demand-wise from the charge points, and then really balancing that and scaling the power that goes to those charge points. So from that perspective, I feel like that's okay. Obviously, not always is that going to be suitable. In terms of then, if you want to try and future-proof it, you may need grid upgrades, which can be expensive. So you can still run into that challenge, but this is really, again, just a stepping stone to, you're right, if it's 9 to 5, that run and delay, it's just one element of a number of different services that could be provided to, you know, a workplace in this example, to help support the grid, but also ensure that, you know, the end customers and drivers are still receiving enough of a charge to be ready for when they need to use that vehicle again.
And next question: what are Shell doing about the security elements of the legislation coming into effect at the end of the year, i.e. anti-tamper on charges?
Yeah, great question. So I think from our side, we've already been in development for maybe the last 6 months or so, specifically around these regulations that are coming into effect. We actually have our own sort of dedicated sort of cybersecurity team, engaging with kind of regulators on a sort of European perspective to make sure that obviously we're up to the minimum standards. I think just to stress, we really welcome this. It's not to say that right now it's maybe much of a concern as it will be in the near future when we have millions of charge points in the ground. And we would sort of probably expect actually more regulations and legislation to come out as markets mature. And obviously our goal or intention, as I sort of alluded to on other elements, is to provide more education around that. So we will be also looking to the government to help support that. So I can't give any more specifics on that at this stage. Again, happy to come back on that. And I'm sure we'll be hopefully doing another session with yourself, Molly, just maybe to touch on some of the sort of key points to take away from that and what we've been doing in the background. So more than happy though to come back on that if we can make a note of that. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming into the last few minutes of this now, so another question from me, if you don't mind. In terms of demand response services, are there enough EVs in Britain to make a significant difference? Have we hit that sort of tipping point?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think at this stage, there would be some difference, but I think when you look at it on the scale, the sort of numbers allude when we sort of went through this with the energy services team, but we're really going to need sort of millions, and it's a difficult question to answer, but at this moment in time, it's not going to maybe help as much as we would like it to, but certainly in the future, it will absolutely play its part. And when we look at, if we said even like 100, 200, 300,000, into those sort of numbers, as we're already sort of seeing on the home space, there will be some difference, but there's a lot more growth needed to really sort of see that impact, I guess, that would really play its part in that sort of grid balancing to do it on scale. But yeah, I think at this stage, there's a little bit more time to go in terms of installing units both at home and in the workplace before we'll see maybe the impact we'd like to see.
And how many DSLR services performed are expected to benefit the greater grid, given DNO automated network management systems are likely to consume free headroom DSR makes available?
Yeah, good question. I would need to come back to you on that. Again, if we can put that down, please, Molly, I'm keen to make sure we answer these. So I'd need to come back to you on that with specifics around that.
Okay, no problem. And then probably into our final-ish question. Are Shell's smart controls delivered via IoT or cloud? And if so, are UK servers, asking as Amazon's AWS cloud service had outages last year?
Yeah, so I guess from our perspective, without giving sort of maybe too much insight away, we've sort of recently just gone through quite a big transformation internally, moving to the AWS service, for example. So yeah, in terms of the benefit that's going to bring us, obviously from a security measure, yes, okay, there was the outage as you sort of mentioned last year, but we saw that as a kind of key stepping stone for us to move away from obviously legacy systems to allow us to talk in the millions in terms of charge points and that scalability and managing that. So in terms of your point before, I think it was on IoT cloud. Again, I need to get exact confirmation, but my understanding is that they are. So, but I will need to get clarity just to be certain on that.
No problem. Well, as we're moving into the final minute, I think it's probably best if we draw this to a close at this point. Thank you so much, Ewan, for the presentation and for answering all our questions. I've noted down a couple that we didn't manage to get around to, but if anything does occur to any of the viewers now, please do feel free to drop us a line and reach out. A recording of this session will be up on Current in the next couple of days with a write-up of some of the key discussion points. And following on from this, we'll have an email going around which will give people access to the slides as well. But yeah, anything else, just reach out. And apart from that, I think it's just left for me to say thank you again to Ewan, thank you to Shell Recharge, and yeah, have a lovely Wednesday.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.